And suddenly I was a little frightened. I suddenly felt just a little empty inside and a little lonely about the whole thing.
I implied that Audie Murphy struggled with alcohol and drug addiction in the 50s and 60s.
A little aircraft carrying America's most decorated war hero disappeared into the fog-covered Virginia mountains on May 28, 1971. The Audie Murphy mystery appeared to be simple, terrible weather, pilot mistake, and a horrible catastrophe. We accepted this explanation for 50 years. The nation's greatest hero may have been purposefully suppressed by the very government he almost died defending. But the truth is finally coming to light thanks to recently released documents and forensic evidence that was discovered. They didn't want you to know this narrative. The fatal crash that changed everything, 6 passengers were getting ready to board. A twin-engine Aero Commander 680 on the morning of May 28, 1971. At a small airfield in Martinsville, Virginia, Audie Murphy was one of them. Murphy, who was 45 years old, had earned every combat medal his appreciative country could give him after surviving numerous near-death experiences during World War II. Herman Butler, an experienced pilot with more than 8,000 flight hours, was the pilot that day. Butler was neither a novice to the difficulties of mountain flying nor a weekend hobbyist. Among those who knew him, he had a reputation for cautious professionalism. Nevertheless, Butler decided to fly on this specific morning despite the poor weather and the fog that made it difficult to see beyond the mountain. Range. The Aero Commander 680 struck Brush Mountain with tremendous power 14 minutes after takeoff. It had an immediate and disastrous effect. The bodies of the 6 passengers were strewn among the debris that covered the mountainside. After they all died instantly. When the plane came into contact with the harsh rock and wood, it practically fell apart, leaving behind a debris field that would take days for investigators to properly record and retrieve. The National Transportation Safety Board's formal investigation proceeded with bureaucratic efficiency. Investigators looked at what was left of the wreckage, spoke with witnesses, looked over meteorological forecasts, and evaluated the flight path. The public's demand for closure was met by their prompt and seemingly simple conclusion. They concluded that it was a pilot error. Herman Butler's decision to fly into steep territory in inclement weather was a catastrophic blunder. The dim visibility, even for a seasoned pilot, the difficult terrain had proven to be too much. It was nothing more than a horrible accident. The case was closed and placed in the files of aviation mishaps that killed people every year over American skies. This explanation was adequate for the majority of Americans. Unfortunately, small aircraft crashes were common, especially in difficult terrain and bad weather. Murphy had just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, falling prey to the same laws of physics and human frailty that had taken the lives of innumerable others. The country mourned, paid tribute to him, and moved on. However, discrepancies lurked like shadows in the fog underlying this charming story. The people who knew Murphy the best, especially his widow Pamela, had misgivings that would never go away. Aviation specialists who examined the case discreetly pointed out irregularities that deviated from normal accident trends. And over the ensuing decades, bits and pieces of information would gradually come to light, each one lending credence to an unsettling prospect for which the majority of Americans were completely unprepared. What if the official narrative was a well-crafted fabrication meant to hide a much more sinister reality? One must first comprehend the incredible path that took Audie Murphy from the Texas cotton fields to the pinnacles of national fame and, finally, to that fateful flight over Virginia in order to comprehend why anyone would wish to harm America's greatest war hero. From dirt and deprivation to unimaginable glory, Audie Murphy's story doesn't start with victory, but rather with poverty so harsh and unrelenting that it would have shattered most people's spirits before they could completely develop. Born in the harsh terrain of rural Hunt County in 1925, Murphy arrived in a world with little mercy and even less hope in Texas. in the agricultural economy of the South during the Great Depression. His parents were sharecroppers, a genteel euphemism for what amounted to legalized servitude. The Murphy family was caught in a generational cycle of debt and misery, working land they would never own and reaping harvests that would never truly be theirs. Young Audie, the seventh of 12 children, fought for resources that were already quite limited. What little stability the family had was destroyed when Audie's father abandoned her when she was still a little child. The little kid was suddenly put into the position of man of the house, a duty that no child should have. But Murphy accepted it with a stoicism that would later come in handy on the European battlefields. When his mother passed away in 1941, 16-year-old Murphy had to deal with the overwhelming challenge of holding together what was left of his broken family. Murphy would be plagued by a diaspora of dashed hopes for the remainder of his life as his siblings were dispersed to relatives and orphanages. Murphy's eventual military proficiency was built on the skills he was compelled to acquire due to poverty. He was hunting wildlife to feed his siblings by the time he was 8 years old. And he was learning to shoot with an accuracy that came from necessity rather than sport. The family didn't have the money for ammunition, so every bullet had to count. Murphy saw a chance to get away from the poverty that had characterized his entire life when Pearl Harbor suddenly turned America from a peaceful country to one at war. Attracted by the Marines' reputation as elite combatants, he tried to join. Because he was too little, they rejected him. In an attempt to experience the world outside of Texas's dusty roads, he attempted the Navy. For the same reason, they turned him down. Attracted by the additional income that jump duty provided, he tried to enlist in the Army paratroopers. Rejection once more. He eventually persuaded the Army infantry to accept him in 1942. Shortly after turning 17, by being persistent and fabricating his age. What transpired next would turn this small, illiterate country boy into a legend whose achievements would seem unthinkable if military historians hadn't painstakingly recorded them. Audie Murphy became the deadliest American soldier of the war as a result of the savagery of battle in Europe, which uncovered talents that poverty had unintentionally fostered. The making of an indestructible warrior. Audie Murphy's metamorphosis from a rejected recruit to America's most deadly soldier occurred faster than anyone could have predicted. Murphy was sent to North Africa within months of enlisting in 1942, when he was thrown into a war that engulfed nations and continents. The young Texan, who had never left the impoverished borders of Hunt County, was now negotiating the intricacies of contemporary warfare on foreign terrain, while surrounded by soldiers whose experiences had little in common with his own difficult life. Military leaders soon realized that Murphy had an almost superhuman capacity for composure in the face of adversity. Murphy's mind appeared to reach a condition of increased clarity, while other soldiers, many of whom were older and better educated, froze or frightened when bullets started flying and artillery rounds erupted around them. His focus was reinforced by the turmoil that overtook others. His battle record started to mount up at an astonishingly quick pace. By seizing and using German machine guns against enemy positions, Murphy single-handedly decimated an Italian cavalry regiment during the Allied invasion of Sicily. He broke through enemy lines in France to seize a German machine gun nest, then used the weapon he had taken to decimate approaching soldiers. He was exposed in no man's land at Ramatoul for more than an hour, firing artillery at enemy forces with total disregard for his own safety. With every action, he received praise, awards, and the admiration of men who had previously written him off as being too young and little to be useful in battle. On a chilly January day in 1945, close to the French hamlet of Holtzwihr, Murphy experienced the peak of his military career and the event that would permanently define him in American military history. Murphy's company was reduced to just 19 effective soldiers from its initial strength of 128. They were up against an overwhelming German force backed by artillery and tanks. which ought to have led to their instant capitulation or destruction. Murphy took a choice that went against every military reasoning and self-preservation instinct as his surviving men withdrew under the overwhelming enemy attack. He boarded a smoldering tank destroyer, knowing full well that it would blow up at any time, and started fighting the German infantry with its machine gun. Murphy stood atop what was effectively a mobile bomb for more than an hour after suffering a leg wound. When his ammo eventually ran out, he led a counterattack that pushed the Germans back after neutralizing dozens of opposing soldiers and interfering with their planned assault. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest military award in the country, for this deed, which he carried out at the age of 19. By the end of the war, Murphy had received 5 medals from France and Belgium, in addition to every combat award the United States could give. He had been wounded 3 times, neutralized more than 240 enemy fighters in recorded engagements, and advanced from private to second lieutenant via battlefield commissions. At a time when the country sorely needed icons of bravery and sacrifice, his boyish visage appeared on the cover of Life magazine, introducing America to its most decorated soldier, true war hero. The notoriety that ensued after his return home appeared to be a fantastical conclusion to an unlikely tale. However, for Audie Murphy, winning the war would only be the start of a different kind of conflict, one that would take place inside his own troubled psyche rather than on foreign territory. The demons Murphy had acquired in the European forests would follow him into the California sound stages, threatening to destroy everything his wartime heroics had gained, even while Hollywood beckoned with promises of wealth and ongoing acclaim. Hollywood lights and inner darkness when actor James Cagney saw Murphy's picture on the cover of Life magazine in 1945. He saw right away the commercially viable blend of genuine bravery and attractive youth. Murphy was personally invited to California by Cagney. Despite Murphy's total lack of acting skills, Universal Studios granted him a contract because they saw the publicity value of signing America's most decorated soldier. Murphy was completely unprepared for the false world he was entering when he first arrived in Hollywood. He had no formal education that could have assisted him in navigating the entertainment elite, no awareness of the complex dynamics of the industry, and no ties beyond Cagney's first introduction. Murphy slowly developed a career that went beyond his initial novelty as a military hero turned actor over the course of 2 decades, appearing in over 40 films. Directors and other actors who had previously written him off as a promotional stunt began to respect him once he showed real talent. In the 1955 film adaptation of his book, To Hell and Back, Murphy played himself, virtually reliving his combat adventures for the cameras. This was his biggest commercial hit. The movie was a huge hit at the box office, establishing a record for Universal Studios that remained for 20 years until Jaws. Murphy appeared to outsiders to have realized the epitome of the American dream. However, Murphy was unable to manage or escape the evil that lay beneath this well-built facade. Physical scars were only one aspect of the wounds caused by the conflict. Although there was no such diagnostic category in the 1950s and 1960s, he had what is now known as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Veterans were merely supposed to put their military experiences behind them and hide their trauma behind a facade of stoicism and macho bluster. Murphy didn't feel safe even in his own bedroom, so he kept a loaded revolver beneath his pillow every night. He was troubled by insomnia, and when fatigue finally drove him to sleep, terrifying nightmares would wake him up. He developed a compulsive gambling habit, developed a prescription sleeping drug addiction, and experienced progressively erratic mood swings. After 2 years, his first marriage to actress Wanda Hendricks ended in divorce. Hendricks later revealed the night Murphy had held her at gunpoint while locked in a nightmare before completely awakening. Even Pamela Archer's patience was unable to drive out the demons plaguing her husband, despite the fact that his second marriage to her proved more resilient. giving Murphy to sons and security he had never experienced. Murphy's groundbreaking openness to openly discuss his psychological issues set him apart from innumerable other suffering veterans. Murphy refused to keep quiet during a time when acknowledging mental health issues was seen as a sign of weakness. He started pressing for government research on war trauma, publicly supporting improved care for veterans with comparable symptoms, and leveraging his celebrity status to validate psychological injuries as legitimate medical illnesses. Murphy's lobbying efforts, which at the time appeared to be purely humanitarian, would ultimately put him at odds with influential organizations that had great motivations to conceal the real psychological consequences of war from the general public. The veterans champion and growing shadows by the late 1960s. Audie Murphy had transformed from a Hollywood star into something much more important and possibly hazardous to influential people. Murphy had a deep grasp of the psychological effects of fighting due to his own battles with post-traumatic stress disorder, and his innate empathy motivated him to speak up for people without his platform. Murphy started going to Veterans Administration hospitals around the nation on a daily basis, spending hours conversing with veterans who had returned from Korea and the intensifying Vietnam War. These weren't planned publicity gimmicks for favorable media attention. Murphy sincerely wanted to know what veterans were going through, what treatments they were getting, and whether the VA system was meeting their needs. His support reached the halls of authority. Murphy used his stature as a combat hero to testify before congressional committees, attracting the attention of lawmakers who might otherwise overlook the grievances of regular soldiers. His candor was revolutionary because it went against the societal norm that true men suffered in silence. Murphy fervently maintained that psychological damage should receive the same medical care and money for research as physical injury. Murphy's financial circumstances worsened in ways that were strangely fortuitous. Westerns went out of style, which hurt his Hollywood career. Investments in businesses started to fail remarkably consistently. The most concerning issues were growing federal tax issues, which got worse just as his support for veterans became increasingly outspoken. Years later, financial investigators looking at the timetable would see the connection between Murphy's increasingly harsh critiques and the abrupt, hostile attention from tax officials. Murphy had started working on a television series about real soldiers' experiences by the early 1970s. However, when he dug deeper into his investigation, interviewing people and looking over documents that understanding VA staff members discreetly supplied, he discovered something that turned his innocuous endeavor into a possible bombshell. Murphy started uncovering unsettling connections between defense contractors, VA hospitals, and covert research projects associated with spy services. He gathered testimonies from veterans who thought they had been the subjects of non-consensual tests, identified certain places where dubious operations took place, and tracked federal cash going from the VA into front groups with ties to intelligence. He conducted his research with the same rigorous attention to detail that had made him such a successful soldier. In June 1971, Murphy arranged talks with investigative journalists from prominent magazines. Regarding the creation of a legal defense fund for VA whistleblowers, he spoke with his lawyer. He was getting ready to reveal what he had found, using his notoriety and moral authority to draw attention to atrocities against vulnerable veterans. However, someone was closely observing Murphy's actions, and they had no intention of letting the greatest military hero in American history become the country's most dangerous informant. The 14 minutes that changed history at the little airstrip in Martinsville, Virginia, the morning of May 28, 1971, started with a false sense of routine. Audie Murphy showed up for what seemed to be a standard business flight to see possible investors. He was traveling with 5 other people, including pilot Herman Butler, whose 8,000 flight hours ought to have ensured their safety. Although there was some fog drifting across the mountain valleys, the weather was not particularly bad for an experienced pilot. Butler's choice to carry out the flight would thereafter serve as the main justification for the subsequent events. However, aviation specialists who were Butler's reputation was perplexed by this decision. The individual was well known in the aviation industry for his cautious attitude to weather-related choices, his reverence for mountainous terrain, and his reluctance to take needless chances. His actions that morning appeared to be fundamentally at odds with his known personality. The twin-engine Aero Commander 680 took off and descended into the gray sky of Virginia. The airplane had to navigate through increasingly difficult visibility for 14 minutes. Butler was flying at an abnormally low altitude, much lower than what safety regulations advised for hilly areas. His flight path appeared to be purposefully kept inside the danger zone, where the greatest risk was caused by poor sight and uncertain terrain. This behavior was incomprehensible to a pilot with Butler's experience. Then disaster came. With terrible force, the Aero Commander crashed onto Brush Mountain. The effect was complete and immediate. The airplane broke apart over the mountainside as fuel caught fire and metal tore apart. The 6 people inside perished right away. The remains of America's most decorated soldier, who had survived numerous near-death experiences on European battlefields, were found among the wreckage strewn throughout the Virginia woods. The investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board proceeded quickly, possibly too quickly. The official conclusion was reached within weeks. Pilot error brought on by flying into difficult terrain in bad weather. Herman Butler had made a crucial error in judgment. Along with numerous other aviation mishaps, the investigation was closed and filed away. The explanation seemed meaningless to Pamela Murphy and her sons. Pamela was aware of her husband's combat-trained sense of peril. He would never get on a plane with a pilot he didn't fully trust. She was forced to accept the official narrative despite her persistent reservations, since she lacked the means or proof to refute the government's conclusions. There were secrets at the accident site that would not be discovered for decades. The debris was dispersed more widely than would be expected from conventional impact patterns. Important parts were unexpectedly missing. No one would believe that evidence would eventually surface, indicating America's greatest war hero had been purposefully silenced by the government he had almost died defending. The physical evidence told a different story than the official report, but the forensic techniques needed to interpret that story did not yet exist. Secrets buried in official vaults, the first breakthrough in 2018 came from an unexpected source. The regular declassification of intelligence papers from the Cold War era under the 50-year rule that obliged official secrets to ultimately become public. Hundreds of records mentioning Audie Murphy were found among the thousands of pages made public. This finding instantly sparked concerns about why A.E., Hollywood actor and retired war hero, would be the subject of such intensive investigation from the intelligence agency. Even the most skeptical onlookers used to government overreach were astounded by the extent of surveillance exposed in these documents. Murphy had been under close surveillance since at least 1969. His phone conversations were recorded. His mail was intercepted, and several spies were placed in his closest circle to report on his connections and actions. It wasn't ordinary or informal background surveillance. Murphy had been designated as a priority subject under the now-famous COINTEL program, the FBI's domestic counterintelligence operation that targeted civil rights activists, political dissidents, and anybody else thought to pose a threat to government interests. According to internal papers, Murphy was being monitored with resources comparable to those given to prominent civil rights activists and anti-war leaders. This level of attention was incomprehensible for a patriotic war hero unless he had discovered something that influential institutions were desperately trying to conceal. According to the records, Murphy's final project to television series about the experiences of veterans had raised concerns at the highest levels of several government agencies. His study had brought him dangerously near to secret operations that used vulnerable veterans as test subjects for behavioral alteration. Dr. Eleanor Whitfield, an archive researcher, spent months examining the recently made public records in order to piece together a timeline that linked Murphy's investigative efforts to increased monitoring and increasingly suspicious agency internal emails. According to the pattern, Murphy had changed from being a person of interest to an active threat that needed to be contained right away by the beginning of 1971. Memoranda that were partially redacted made reference to emergency procedures and backup plans, bureaucratic terminology that, when analyzed in context, took on ominous connotations. Murphy's recorded plans for June 1971 were the most incriminating. Investigative journalists from the Washington Post and New York Times were set to meet with him in the weeks after his deadly trip. According to his appointment calendar, which was retrieved from his things and recently examined, these same newspapers would reveal the Pentagon Papers story a year later, proving their readiness to release classified material for the benefit of the public. Additionally, Murphy had spoken with his lawyer about setting up a legal defense fund for VA whistleblowers who were afraid of reprisals for coming up. It was impossible to write off the time as a coincidence. Murphy passed away a few days before he was supposed to meet with some of the nation's most prominent investigative journalists, who had the authority and platform to push his findings into the national discourse. Intelligence services were fully aware of these scheduled meetings and deemed them an intolerable risk, according to the declassified materials. Although extremely concerning, documentary evidence of surveillance and concern was not the same as proof of murder. Investigators would have to look at the tangible evidence from the actual crash in order to do that, utilizing cutting-edge forensic methods on debris that had been decaying in storage for many years. The smoking gun in the wreckage. The second crucial discovery in solving Audie Murphy's death mystery came from forensic science advancements that enabled investigators to re-examine tangible proof using methods not available in 1971.